My name is Elena. I'm 30 years old, and on the day of my sister's wedding, I was treated like I didn't exist. Her new father-in-law, a man named Arthur Vance, brushed past me near the gift table like I was a coat rack, a piece of furniture that was in his way. He was tall and broad, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he carried himself with the kind of arrogance that only old money can buy. As he moved past me, he muttered to his wife loud enough for me to hear, "Oh, you're just the sister. Just the sister." The words were so small, so simple, but they landed like a punch to the gut. They stung more than I wanted to admit. He didn't look at me. He didn't say my name. He just dismissed me. In his world of titles and balance sheets, I was a nobody. An inconvenient footnote at his son's wedding. He didn't know me. He didn't know what I'd been through, or the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to keep the lights on for the very girl he was now welcoming into his family. And he definitely didn't know that in about an hour, after one simple speech, he was going to regret every single second of that dismissive, casual arrogance. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. My sister, Ashley, and I grew up in a house that was full of holes. Not holes in the walls, but holes in our family, empty spaces where people were supposed to be. The first and biggest one was left by our mother. She walked out on a Tuesday morning when I was 8, and Ashley was 4. I don't have a full, clear picture of her in my mind, just a collection of disconnected fragments. The sharp scent of her hairspray, the clinking sound of her bracelets, the way she would laugh at something on TV. A sound that was always a little too loud, a little too brittle. The weeks leading up to her departure were tense. The air in our house was thick with whispers and arguments that happened behind closed doors after we were supposed to be asleep. I'd lie in my bed, clutching my blanket, trying to decipher the angry murmurs from the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but I understood the tone. It was the sound of something breaking. Dad started looking tired all the time, with deep purple shadows under his eyes. Mom started spending more and more time out with her friends, coming home late, her perfume mingling with the stale smell of cigarette smoke. The morning she left, the house was strangely quiet. She came into my room and kissed my forehead. Her lips were cold. "Be a good girl for your daddy, Elena," she whispered. She didn't go into Ashley's room. I heard the front door click shut, and then the sound of her car's engine starting, fading into the distance. She never looked back. She never called, never sent a birthday card. She just vanished, leaving a silence in the house that our father spent the rest of his life trying to fill. Dad tried, though. God, did he try. His name was Michael, and he was a carpenter, a man who believed you could fix anything with enough patience and the right tools. He tried to fix us. He took on the role of 2 parents, a heavy burden for his already tired shoulders. His hands were always rough and calloused, with fine lines of wood stain permanently etched into his skin, but they were the gentlest hands I ever knew. He wasn't a perfect father. He couldn't braid hair, so Ashley and I went to school with lopsided ponytails that always came undone by recess. His idea of a gourmet meal was spaghetti with jarred sauce, and he once tried to bake Ashley a birthday cake that came out looking like a brown crater. We ate it anyway, laughing so hard we cried, the smoky, chocolatey mess tasting like love. He worked constantly, yet he always made time. He was there. He showed up. That was his one unbreakable promise. He'd come home smelling of sawdust and sweat, but he'd still sit at the kitchen table for an hour, helping me with my math homework, his brow furrowed in concentration. He'd read bedtime stories to Ashley, his deep voice stumbling over the funny character names, until she fell asleep. He was the one who held us during thunderstorms, who taught me how to change a tire, and who always reminded us, every single day, that we were his whole world. He owned a small business, a little workshop in a rented garage where he built custom furniture. It was his sanctuary. On Saturdays, he'd take us with him. The workshop was a magical place, filled with the rich, earthy smell of fresh-cut pine and the sweet scent of varnish. Sunlight would stream through the dusty windows, illuminating the floating particles of sawdust like tiny dancing fairies. He'd give us scraps of wood and our own small pieces of sandpaper and let us help. Ashley, being younger, would quickly lose interest and start drawing elaborate chalk cities on the concrete floor. But I was fascinated. I'd watch my father for hours, mesmerized by the way he could take a rough, plain block of wood and transform it into something beautiful and strong. He worked with a quiet, focused grace, his movements precise and confident. "You see, Elena," he told me once, running his hand over a freshly sanded tabletop, "you have to respect the wood. You can't force it to be something it's not. You have to find its strength and work with it." I didn't realize it then, but he was teaching me about life. Our little trio wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were a small, patched-together crew, and we learned to rely on each other. Ashley and I became each other's shadows. I was the protective older sister, and she was the bright, bubbly light that kept the lingering sadness in our house at bay. We were a team. It was the three of us against the world. Then, one morning, the world won. I was 21, a junior at a state college about an hour's drive from home. I was living in a noisy dorm, drowning in textbooks and instant noodles, navigating my first real taste of independence. It was a Wednesday in early spring. I remember the date because I had a chemistry midterm I was convinced I was going to fail. My roommate Sarah was still asleep when my phone buzzed on the nightstand at 6:02 a.m. It was an unknown number with a local area code. I groaned, assuming it was a wrong number, and answered with a grumpy, sleep-filled, "Hello?" A man's voice, calm and professional and utterly devoid of emotion, asked, "Am I speaking with Elena?" "Yes," I said, sitting up, a strange unease prickling my skin. "My name is Dr. Roberts. I'm a physician at St. Mary's Hospital." My blood went cold. Hospitals and 6 a.m. phone calls were a combination that could only mean one thing. My mind raced. Ashley, was Ashley okay? Had something happened at school? "There's been an accident," the doctor continued, his voice steady. "A vehicle accident involving a Mr. Michael." He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "Your father." The world tilted on its axis. The air in my tiny dorm room felt thick and heavy, impossible to breathe. "My dad, is he? What happened?" "His truck was involved in a collision on the interstate this morning. It seems he hit a patch of black ice." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the distant sound of traffic outside my window, the soft breathing of my roommate, the frantic, terrified thumping of my own heart. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, "Please be okay, please be okay, please be okay." My voice was a stranger's when I finally spoke, a thin, reedy whisper. "Is he okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was only a second, a tiny fraction of time, but it stretched into a cold, empty eternity. In that second, I knew. "I'm very sorry," the doctor said, and the carefully constructed world I had known my entire life shattered into a million pieces. I don't remember the rest of the conversation. I don't remember hanging up the phone. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of my room, fully dressed, my car keys clutched in my hand. Sarah was awake, looking at me with wide, worried eyes. "Elena, what is it? What's wrong?" "My dad?" I choked out, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "I have to go home." The drive was a blur of smeared taillights and gray asphalt. My mind was a chaotic storm of denial and despair. This couldn't be real. It was a mistake. I would get home, and Dad would be there in the kitchen, making his terrible, lumpy scrambled eggs, and this would all be a horrible nightmare. But with every mile that passed, the cold, hard reality settled deeper into my bones. He was gone. The man who was our sun, our moon, and all our stars. The man who held our broken family together with his calloused hands and tired smiles was gone. And then a new wave of horror washed over me, even more terrifying than my own grief. I had to be the one to tell Ashley. I walked through the front door of our small house, a place that had always been a sanctuary, but now felt cold and alien. Ashley was in the kitchen, her back to me, humming along to some pop song on the radio while she made toast. The familiar, comforting scene was so jarringly normal that it felt like a physical blow. She turned, a bright, beautiful smile on her face that was so much like his. "Hey, you're home early," she said, her voice full of cheerful surprise. "Did you decide to skip your midterm after all?" My face must have betrayed me. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, then dawning fear. Her eyes searched mine, and in them I saw the reflection of my own devastation. "Elena, what is it? What's wrong? Where's Dad?" I couldn't speak. The words were lodged in my throat. I walked over to her, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and pulled her into my arms. She was so small, so fragile. She was still a kid. I was supposed to protect her from things like this. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, and in a broken, ragged whisper, I told her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. It was worse. She just collapsed. Her body went limp, and if I hadn't been holding on to her so tightly, she would have crumpled to the floor. A deep, silent, agonizing sob shook her entire frame, but no sound came out. She just clung to me, her fingers digging into my back, her whole body trembling with a grief too profound for tears. And in that moment, as I held my shattered sister in our now silent kitchen, the last vestiges of my own childhood evaporated. The weight of the world, heavy and unforgiving, settled onto my shoulders. We were alone now, truly, completely alone. There was no one coming to save us. There were no more parents, no more safety nets. It was just me, and it was on me to keep us alive. The grief would have to wait. Survival had to come first. Grief is a luxury for people who have the time to fall apart, the space to shatter and be put back together again. I had neither. The week we buried our father, the world began to close in, and the vultures arrived. They didn't have wings. They came in crisp suits, with leather briefcases and sympathetic smiles that never reached their eyes. They came in the form of official-looking envelopes with red, urgent stamps, filled with cold, unforgiving words like foreclosure, liquidation, and outstanding debt. I learned quickly that my father's small business, his passion, was built on a foundation of loans. He'd been trying to expand, to build a better future for us, but he'd been swimming against a current of debt that was too strong. The truck he was driving in the accident wasn't paid off. The mortgage on our house was 2 months behind. The expensive woodworking equipment in his workshop was leased. The banks, the credit card companies, the lenders, they didn't care that our father was dead. They didn't see 2 grieving daughters. They saw a defaulted account, a liability, a column of numbers in the red. The first notice was from the mortgage company. It was taped to our front door, a formal, heartless letter stating that the property would be repossessed in 30 days. 30 days to pack up 18 years of memories. 30 days to dismantle our home. The house itself seemed to groan under the weight of our sorrow. The pencil marks on the doorframe that tracked our height felt like a cruel joke. The faded spot on the living room wall where Dad's favorite armchair used to be was like an open wound. Packing was a torturous process of unearthing ghosts. Every photo, every dusty trinket, every piece of paper held a memory of him. I found a Father's Day card I had made him in the 3rd grade, with a crooked drawing of the 2 of us holding hands. I had to sell his collection of old vinyl records, his pride and joy, to a pawn shop for $50 just to buy us groceries for the week. The day we left was gray and drizzling, the sky weeping with us. We stood on the sidewalk with a few cardboard boxes, watching as a man from the bank changed the locks on our front door. Our home was gone. The car was next, then the workshop. Everything that had his name on it was systematically stripped away, leaving us with nothing but each other. We were erased. I was barely 21 years old, but I felt ancient. I had to navigate a bureaucratic maze that was designed to break people far stronger than me. I sat in a cold, sterile office at the Department of Social Services, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and quiet desperation, filling out stacks of paperwork to become Ashley's legal guardian. The social worker, a woman named Ms. Albright, looked at me over the top of her glasses with an expression of profound pity. "Are you sure you're ready for this, honey?" she asked, her voice soft. "This is a tremendous responsibility. You'll be giving up your entire life." I looked at my 17-year-old sister, who was sitting beside me, staring blankly at the wall, a ghost of the vibrant girl she used to be. I took her hand. It was ice cold. "I don't have a choice," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "She's all I have." I dropped out of college. There was no money for tuition, no time for classes, no mental energy for anything other than survival. Our first priority was a roof over our heads. We found a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of town, situated above a 24-hour laundromat. The apartment always smelled faintly of bleach and damp clothes, and the rhythmic thumping of the washing machines below became the soundtrack to our lives. We pushed 2 twin beds together in the single bedroom. There was no privacy, no space, but it was ours. It was safe. That was a victory, but that victory demanded a steep price. My life became a relentless, exhausting cycle of work. Without a degree or specialized skills, I had to take whatever I could get. I stitched together a life out of 3 separate, soul-crushing jobs. My day began at 5 a.m. at a greasy spoon diner called the Corner Booth. I'd put on my starchy, ill-fitting waitress uniform and spend the next 8 hours on my feet, navigating a sea of demanding customers. I poured endless cups of bitter coffee, balanced heavy trays of food, and forced a smile even when a customer was rude or my feet felt like they were on fire. The diner was a world of its own, populated by tired truck drivers, grumpy old men, and the occasional cheerful family. The cook, a gruff but kind man named Sal, would sometimes slip me a leftover muffin, knowing I probably hadn't eaten. The pay was minimum wage, but the tips were cash, and cash was the lifeblood that got us through each day. My afternoons were spent in the silent, fluorescent-lit purgatory of a temp agency. They would send me to different corporate offices to perform mind-numbing, anonymous tasks. I was a ghost in a cubicle, inputting endless strings of numbers into spreadsheets. answering phones for companies whose names I'd forget by the next day. I was invisible, a temporary body filling a chair, easily replaceable. The full-time employees would walk past me without making eye contact, their conversations about weekend plans and mortgages belonging to a world I no longer inhabited. It was soul-crushing, but it was a steady, predictable paycheck, a small anchor in the chaotic storm of my life. My nights were spent on a beat-up old scooter I bought with the last of my savings. I delivered pizzas for a local chain. I'd ride through the dark, rain-slicked streets, the warm, greasy smell of pizza a constant companion. It was lonely work. I'd deliver to brightly lit homes filled with the sounds of laughter and family, and for a fleeting, painful moment, I'd be reminded of everything I had lost. Then I'd get back on my scooter, the cold night air a harsh slap back to reality, and ride to the next delivery. Fear was my constant companion. It was a cold, tight knot in my stomach that never loosened. It was the terror of my scooter breaking down, the dread of seeing a utility shut-off notice, the panic of getting sick when I had no health insurance. Every trip to the grocery store was a high-stakes calculation. I'd stand in the aisle, my heart pounding, adding up the cost of milk, bread, and eggs on my phone's calculator, often having to put things back on the shelf. I mastered the art of making a single chicken last for 3 meals. I told Ashley I'd eaten at work more times than I could count, just to make sure she had a full plate. My most important job, the one that took the most energy, was hiding all of this from her. She was dealing with her own grief, the trauma of losing her father and her home, the challenge of navigating her last year of high school in a new, unfamiliar place. I couldn't let her see how terrified I was. I couldn't let her carry the burden of our financial desperation. I had to be the rock, the confident adult who had everything under control. I'd come home from a 16-hour day, my body aching and my mind numb with exhaustion, and I'd force a smile, ask her about her day, and help her with her homework. But after she was asleep, I'd sit at our tiny, wobbly kitchen table, the dim light from the street lamp outside casting long shadows on the wall, and the facade would crumble. The tears I'd held back all day would fall, silent and hot, as the overwhelming weight of it all threatened to crush me. I was 21, and I was responsible for another human life. If I fell apart, we both went down, and I was never, ever going to let that happen. To keep us afloat, my world had to shrink. I performed a brutal triage on my own life, cutting away everything that wasn't absolutely essential for survival. My dreams, my passions, my friendships, my very identity, they were all deemed non-essential and sacrificed. The girl I used to be, the one who painted and dreamed of traveling, the one who loved loud concerts and late-night talks with friends, slowly faded away, replaced by a tired, pragmatic machine built for one purpose: work. I used to love painting. In my dorm room at college, I had a small easel set up by the window. I would spend hours dabbing colors onto a canvas, the rich smell of oil paints and turpentine filling the air. It was my escape, the one place where my mind could be quiet. I wasn't trying to be a famous artist. I just loved the feeling of creating something out of nothing. Those art supplies were among the first things I had to sell. I took my easel, my brushes, and my collection of paints to a pawn shop and got $25 for them. I used the money to pay for a new textbook Ashley needed for her English class. As I walked out of the shop, I told myself it was just temporary. One day, I whispered to myself, I'll buy it all back. But one day was a distant, mythical land I never seemed to reach. My life was a relentless series of right nows. My friends from college tried at first. They'd call, their voices full of a cheerful energy that felt like it belonged to another planet. Elena, we're all going out on Friday. You have to come. You need a break, my friend Chloe would insist. They didn't understand that a break was a luxury I couldn't afford. A $10 cocktail was half a tank of gas for my scooter. A few hours out with them meant giving up a precious delivery shift. More than that, the gulf between our lives had become too wide to cross. They talked about dating, annoying professors, and plans for summer internships. I was worried about eviction notices and whether I could afford to buy Ashley a new pair of shoes. I tried to listen, to feign interest, but I felt like a fraud. I was an alien observing a foreign species. After a while, my excuses wore thin, and the calls became less frequent. I didn't blame them. I had become a ghost in my own life story, and it was easier for them to just turn the page. The deepest cut, the sacrifice that left a permanent scar, was my relationship with Ben. We had been together for almost 2 years at college. He was kind and funny, with a warm, easy smile that used to make my stomach flip. I thought I loved him. When Dad died, he was my rock. He drove me home from campus. He sat beside me at the funeral, his hand a steady presence on my back, and he held me for hours while I cried into his shoulder. He tried to be what I needed, but my new life was a relentless hurricane, and it was dragging him down with me. Our relationship withered from a lack of time, energy, and attention. Our dates became me showing up an hour late, smelling of pizza grease, and falling asleep on his couch 10 minutes into a movie. Our phone calls were short and strained, often interrupted by me having to take an order at the diner or navigate to my next delivery address. I was a shell of the girl he had fallen in love with. The fun, spontaneous girl was gone, replaced by a perpetually exhausted woman who carried the weight of the world in the dark circles under her eyes. The end came on a rainy Sunday afternoon. He had bought tickets for a concert, a band we both loved, a desperate attempt to recapture a piece of our old life. But I had to cancel at the last minute. A coworker at the diner had called in sick, and the manager offered me a double shift. The overtime pay was too much to turn down. It meant I could finally pay the overdue electric bill. When I called Ben to cancel, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy and final. He came over to the apartment later that day. He stood awkwardly in our tiny living room, the sound of the rain and the thumping washing machines from below filling the tense silence. His face was etched with a sad, weary resignation. "This isn't working, is it?" he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I wanted to fight, to argue, to promise I would do better, but I couldn't. It would have been a lie. I just shook my head, a single hot tear tracing a path down my cheek. "I feel like I don't even know you anymore," he said, his words gentle but devastatingly sharp. "You're never really here, Elena. Even when you're standing right in front of me, I can see your mind is a million miles away, running through a checklist of bills and responsibilities." He wasn't wrong. My mind was a constant buzz of anxiety. There was no quiet space left for him, for us. "I love you," he continued, his voice cracking, "but I can't do this anymore. I can't keep competing with the ghost of your responsibilities. I feel like I'm just another item on your to-do list, and I'm always at the bottom." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "It was all I had left to offer." "I know you are," he said. He reached out and gently wiped the tear from my cheek with his thumb. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Elena, but I need more than just strength. I need a partner." He was right to leave. I knew that even as my heart was breaking. In a strange, twisted way, it was a relief. It was one less person to let down, one less part of my life to fail at. But when he walked out the door for the last time, the grief that washed over me was profound. It was a mourning for the life I was supposed to have, the normal, happy life that had been stolen from me. I never let Ashley see that pain. My sacrifices had to be invisible to her. She deserved a semblance of a normal teenage life, even if mine was anything but. Every dollar I earned, every ounce of energy I had was poured into her. When she needed a dress for the school dance, I worked an extra shift to buy it for her. When her friends were all getting laptops for graduation, I sold my father's old watch, the last nice thing I had of his, to make sure she had one too. There were moments of friction, of course. She was a teenager, and I was her stressed-out de facto parent. We argued about curfews, about grades, about the boys she was talking to. Once, in the middle of a fight, she yelled, "You're not my mom! Stop trying to control my life." The words hit me like a physical slap. I didn't yell back. I just went into the bathroom and locked the door, leaning against it as silent tears streamed down my face. She didn't understand. She couldn't. I was sacrificing my life not to control hers, but to give her one. But for every moment of pain, there was a moment that made it all worthwhile. Seeing her walk across the stage to get her high school diploma, her face beaming with pride, watching her laugh with her friends, carefree and happy. Those moments were my fuel. They were the validation I needed. I had given up my life so she could have one, and in the quietest, most honest corners of my heart, I believed it was enough, even if it meant I was slowly bleeding out. For 3 relentless years, my life was a frantic, exhausting blur of survival. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The first glimmer of hope came in the form of a permanent job. One of the temp assignments I took was at a mid-sized logistics company called Viridian. The work itself was mind-numbing. Data entry, filing, scheduling, but I approached it with the same desperate focus I applied to everything else. I was always on time. I never made mistakes, and I never complained. I was just grateful for the steady, predictable hours. My supervisor, a kind, no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Carol, noticed my work ethic. A few months into my assignment, a permanent position opened up in the business development department, an entry-level administrative role. It was a real job with a salary, benefits, and the promise of stability. Carol pulled me aside one afternoon and told me she had put my name forward. "You're smart, and you work harder than anyone I've ever seen," she said. "You deserve a real shot." I got the job. The day I signed my contract, I felt a sense of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't my dream job. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was a lifeline. It came with a steady salary and, most importantly, health insurance. The first thing I did was book dentist appointments for myself and Ashley, a luxury we hadn't been able to afford in years. I quit the diner. I quit the pizza deliveries. I finally had one job, just one. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I could take a full, deep breath without the fear of suffocating. We weren't rich, but we weren't perpetually on the brink of disaster anymore. We were stable, but stability felt fragile, precarious. I was a cog in a large corporate machine, easily replaceable. The fear of losing everything again, of being cast back into the storm, was a ghost that still haunted me. I knew a salary wasn't security. Real security was building something that was mine, something that no one could ever take away from us. The opportunity to build that something came from my past. Two of my old friends from my brief time at college, Mark and David, reached out to me. In college, they were the guys who lived in the computer lab, their faces perpetually illuminated by the glow of a screen. They were brilliant coders, genuine tech prodigies. They had an idea for a startup, a new, intuitive logistics software designed to help small and mid-sized businesses streamline their supply chain management. It was a niche, unsexy concept to most people, but from my new job at Viridian, I knew firsthand how inefficient the existing systems were. I knew there was a massive gap in the market. It was a brilliant idea. They had the technical genius to build the product, but they were clueless when it came to business. They didn't know how to write a business plan, how to create a financial model, or how to sell their idea to anyone who wasn't a fellow coder. That's why they called me. We met at a cheap, noisy bar. Mark was the cautious, meticulous one, his brain a living encyclopedia of code. David was the visionary, the passionate, big-picture dreamer. They laid out their idea, their voices filled with an infectious, unshakable belief. "We have no money," Mark admitted bluntly, pushing his glasses up his nose. "We'd be working out of my parents' garage. We can't pay you a salary." My heart sank. A salary was the one thing I couldn't give up. "Then how can I do this?" I asked, the pragmatism of my hard-knock life taking over. David leaned forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Equity, Elena. We do this as equal partners. A third, a third, a third. We build this from the ground up and we all own it. If this thing takes off like we know it will, you won't ever have to worry about money again. You'll have real security, the kind no one can fire you from." The word security resonated deep in my soul. I went home that night and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. It was an insane gamble. I had a stable job, a precious, hard-won stability. But the thought of it ignited a spark in me that I thought had died years ago. The thought of building something from nothing, just like Dad had with his workshop. The thought of creating a future for myself and Ashley that was built on a foundation of our own making. The next day, I called them. "I'm in," I said, "but I have to keep my day job." And so, the grind began all over again. But this time, it was different. This was our grind. I worked my 9 to 5 at Viridian, and then I'd drive straight to Mark's parents' house. Our office was their dusty, cluttered garage. Our conference table was an old door laid across 2 sawhorses. We lived on stale coffee, cheap energy drinks, and dollar pizza slices. It was cold in the winter, sweltering in the summer, and it always smelled faintly of motor oil and old paint. For over a year, it felt like we were shouting into a void. We poured every spare dollar and every waking hour into the company, which we named Nexus. We faced constant rejection. We pitched our software to a dozen potential investors, and they all said the same thing. We were too small, too inexperienced, too ambitious. One smug venture capitalist in a slick suit listened to our pitch, smirked, and told us, "Logistics isn't sexy. You 3 should pack it in and get real jobs." We walked out of that meeting in stunned silence. I remember sitting in the car with Mark and David, the dejection so thick you could taste it. But then David started laughing, a wild, defiant laugh. "He's right," he said. "It's not sexy. It's necessary. And we're going to make him regret not getting in on the ground floor." That became our rallying cry. There were moments of pure despair. One night, a server crash wiped out a week's worth of code. Mark, who was normally calm and unflappable, looked like he was about to cry. We spent the next 48 hours straight in that garage, fueled by nothing but caffeine and sheer willpower, painstakingly rebuilding everything. It was brutal, but when we finally fixed it, the sense of shared triumph was exhilarating. Our first yes came from a small local bakery. The owner was an old man who was overwhelmed by his delivery schedules. He took a chance on us. The contract was tiny, barely enough to cover our server costs for a month, but to us, it was everything. It was proof. It was validation. Our first check was for $500. We didn't cash it. We framed it, and it hung on the garage wall, a symbol of our first victory. That small victory led to another, and then another. Word of mouth began to spread. Our software was good. It was intuitive. It worked. By the time Ashley was finishing her associate's degree at community college, we had a dozen small clients. We were finally making enough revenue to move out of the garage and into a tiny, windowless office space. We hired our first employee. The real breakthrough came about a year later. We landed a meeting with a regional grocery chain that was struggling with their massive distribution network. I spent weeks preparing for that pitch. I used everything I had learned at Viridian, all my knowledge of the industry's pain points. I walked into that boardroom with Mark and David, and for the first time, I felt like we belonged there. I delivered the presentation of my life. They signed a major contract with us. It was our first six-figure deal. The day the first wire transfer hit our company bank account, I was sitting in my car in the office parking lot. I stared at the number on my phone's banking app, a number with more zeros than I had ever seen in my life, and I just broke down and cried. They weren't tears of sadness or exhaustion. They were tears of pure, overwhelming relief. The ground beneath my feet, which had been crumbling and shifting for so many years, finally felt solid. We had done it. We weren't a garage startup anymore. We were a real company. I was finally able to quit my job at Viridian and dedicate myself full-time to Nexus. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I wasn't scared anymore. We were safe. I had kept my promise. I had kept us alive. The years that followed our first big contract were a whirlwind. Nexus grew faster than I could have ever imagined. We moved from our tiny, windowless office to a sleek, modern space downtown with glass walls and a view of the city. We hired dozens of employees. My life, once a cramped, desperate struggle for survival, was now a dizzying schedule of board meetings, product launches, and strategic planning sessions. I was no longer just Elena, the survivor. I was Elena, the CEO. It was a title that felt foreign, like a costume I was still learning how to wear. Amidst this chaotic new chapter of my life, Ashley was my anchor. She had finished her degree and was working as an elementary school teacher, a job she was born for. She was patient, kind, and wonderful with children. She was happy, and her happiness was the dividend on my entire life's investment. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a tense quarterly review meeting, staring at a spreadsheet projected onto the wall, when my personal phone buzzed. I usually ignored it during meetings, but I saw Ashley's name and a string of heart emojis. A familiar pang of sisterly anxiety hit me. I excused myself, stepping into the hallway. "Ash, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice tight with concern. "Everything is amazing," she squealed, her voice so high-pitched and full of joy that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "He asked me." "Elena, he asked me." It took my brain a second to catch up. "He who? Asked you what?" "James, he proposed. We're getting married." The world seemed to stop for a moment. The stress of the board meeting, the spreadsheets, the deadlines, it all melted away, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated joy for my sister. James. He was a kind, gentle architect she had been dating for 2 years. He was the first boy she'd brought home that I hadn't wanted to immediately scare away. He adored her, and it was obvious in the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room. "Oh my God, Ash. Congratulations!" I laughed, tears welling up in my eyes. We spent the next 20 minutes on the phone, her excitedly recounting every detail of the proposal while I leaned against the cool glass wall of my office, just listening and smiling. A few weeks later, I met James for a celebratory dinner. Just the two of us. It was my one condition before I gave my official big sister blessing. We went to a quiet Italian restaurant, and I spent the first hour interrogating him with a series of questions that were probably more intense than any job interview he'd ever had. I asked him about his 5-year plan, his thoughts on family, his financial situation. I was protective, and I made no apologies for it. Ashley was my entire world, and I needed to be certain she was in safe hands. James didn't flinch. He answered every question with patience, honesty, and a genuine earnestness that slowly disarmed me. He spoke about my sister with such profound love and respect that my carefully constructed walls began to crumble. "Elena," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "I know I can never understand the depth of what you two have been through, but I want you to know this. Your sister is the best person I have ever met. My only goal in life is to make her as happy as she makes me. I will spend the rest of my days protecting her and loving her. You have my word." And in that moment, I knew he was the one. I saw in his eyes not just love for Ashley, but a deep respect for our bond, for the journey that had brought us here. I finally relaxed, and for the rest of the dinner, we just talked and laughed. I left that night feeling a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. I was still her protector, but I wasn't her only one anymore. The next step was meeting his family, the Vances. James had told me a bit about them. His father, Arthur Vance, was in finance, a big-shot investment banker who had inherited a fortune and then doubled it. His mother, Eleanor, sat on the boards of several charities. They were, in James's words, a little formal, but good people. The introduction was to take place at their family home, a massive stone mansion in the wealthiest part of the city. The moment I drove through the wrought iron gates, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. I was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, but I suddenly felt underdressed, out of place. James and Ashley met me at the door, and their warm smiles helped ease my nerves. But the moment I stepped inside, the feeling of being an outsider returned with a vengeance. The house was a museum of wealth. The ceilings were impossibly high, the floors were polished marble, and the walls were adorned with imposing oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Arthur and Eleanor Vance greeted me in the grand foyer. Arthur was tall and broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair and eyes the color of cold steel. He gave me a firm, crushing handshake that felt more like a power move than a greeting. Eleanor was thin and impeccably dressed, her smile polite but distant. "So, you're the sister," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a classification. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," Eleanor added, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could have seated 30 people. The conversation was stilted, a dance of polite inquiries that felt like veiled interrogations. They asked me about where I grew up, and I gave them the sanitized, simple version. They asked about my education, and I felt a familiar pang of shame as I explained that I had left college early. "A shame," Arthur commented, taking a sip of his wine. "A degree is so essential in today's world. Elena is a brilliant businesswoman, Dad," James interjected, trying to defend me. Arthur waved a dismissive hand. Of course. Every young person has their little projects." He turned his attention back to me, his gaze assessing, calculating. "James tells us you run some sort of tech company?" "Yes," I said simply. "A logistics software company." "Fascinating," he said, with an air that suggested it was anything but. The rest of the dinner was a blur of condescending remarks and subtle digs, all wrapped in a veneer of upper-class politeness. They didn't approve of me. I wasn't one of them. I didn't come from the right family, the right schools, the right money. In their eyes, I was a rough edge on their perfectly polished family portrait. I left that night with a cold knot of dread in my stomach. James was wonderful, but I was marrying into a family that would only ever see me as just the sister. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a flurry of activity. Ashley was blissfully happy, floating through dress fittings and cake tastings, completely oblivious to the cold front emanating from her future in-laws. I, on the other hand, was acutely aware of it. In every interaction with the Vance family, I was treated with a polite but firm exclusion. I was an afterthought, a necessary but inconvenient part of the wedding package. The rehearsal dinner was held at an exclusive country club, the kind of place with old-world charm and a membership list that was a who's who of the city's elite. The room was filled with the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of expensive crystal. I felt like I was an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. I knew the language, but I didn't understand the customs. I was trying my best to mingle, to be the supportive sister, but I felt utterly invisible. I would join a conversation circle, and the moment I tried to speak, the subject would change, or people would turn their backs slightly, subtly closing me out. I was a ghost at the feast. I was standing alone near the bar, nursing a glass of sparkling water, when Arthur Vance approached me. He wasn't looking at me, but at the crowd, his face set in a look of paternal pride. "Quite the turnout," he commented to the air beside me. "James has so many friends. It's important the company you keep." The implication was clear. I decided to try, for Ashley's sake. "It's a beautiful party, Arthur. You must be very proud." He finally turned his head to look at me, his gaze sweeping over me with a brief, dismissive glance. "Of course. We've given our son the best of everything. It's only natural he'd have the best wedding." He paused, a small, thoughtful frown on his face. "I was looking for your father earlier. I assumed he would be here to give a speech, say a few words." The casual cruelty of his words stole my breath. It was a deliberate power play, a reminder of my station, of the fact that I was coming to this union alone, without the respectable patriarch he deemed necessary. A hot flash of anger surged through me, but I pushed it down, replacing it with a cold, hard shield of composure. "Our father passed away years ago," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "It's just me and Ashley." If I had expected a word of sympathy, a simple, "I'm sorry for your loss," I was mistaken. Arthur merely gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, his expression unchanged. My family tragedy was, to him, a minor, uninteresting detail, like a typo in a long report. It didn't warrant an emotional response. It didn't matter. He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Then, as an afterthought, he turned back to me. "So," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "what is it that you do exactly?" It was a test. A final dismissive judgment. He wasn't asking out of interest. He was asking for a label so he could file me away in the appropriate box in his mind. And in that moment, I made a choice. I could have told him the truth. I could have said, "I am the co-founder and CEO of Nexus, a multi-million-dollar tech company that is revolutionizing the logistics industry." I could have watched his smug expression change, could have enjoyed a fleeting moment of victory, but the thought of it felt cheap. My success was not a weapon to be wielded in a petty war of egos at a country club. My worth was not defined by my job title or my bank account. I had learned that lesson in the darkest, most desperate years of my life. My worth was in my survival, in my love for my sister, in the fact that I was still standing. So I gave him the simple, unadorned truth. "I work in corporate and business development," I said. A slow, knowing smirk spread across Arthur's face. It was the look of a man whose low expectations had been perfectly met. "Ah," he said, nodding. He had his label now. Junior executive, corporate drone, unimportant. He didn't even bother to say, "Nice to meet you," or "Excuse me." He simply turned his back on me mid-sentence, spotting a fellow titan of industry across the room, and walked away, leaving me standing alone, utterly and completely dismissed. The sting of it was sharp, humiliating. It was a familiar feeling, the sting of being underestimated, of being judged and found wanting. For a moment, the angry, resentful part of me wanted to scream. I wanted to chase after him and lay my resume at his feet. But then, a different feeling washed over me, a cold, quiet calm. I looked across the room and saw Ashley. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her face illuminated with pure happiness. She was safe. She was loved. That was the only victory that mattered. This arrogant, small-minded man, he was nothing. He was a footnote in our story. He thought he had seen all there was to see of me, and he had dismissed it. I stayed silent, a small, secret smile playing on my lips, because deep down I knew the truth, and the truth would speak for itself soon enough. The wedding day arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday in June. The air was filled with the sweet scent of roses and the palpable buzz of excitement. My role that morning was that of chief bridesmaid, a whirlwind of activity focused entirely on Ashley. I helped her with her dress, a cascade of white lace that made her look like a princess from a fairy tale. I held her hand when the pre-wedding jitters threatened to overwhelm her. As I fastened a string of pearls, our mother's, one of the few things we had left of hers, around her neck, I saw our reflection in the mirror. Two sisters, survivors, standing on the precipice of a new life. "You look beautiful, Ash," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She turned and hugged me tightly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Elena," she said into my shoulder. "You're my rock, always," I promised, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. This day was the culmination of every sacrifice, every long night, every tear. It was all for this moment, for her happiness. The ceremony was beautiful, held in a historic old church with stunning stained glass windows. I stood beside my sister at the altar, watching as she and James exchanged their vows. I saw the way he looked at her, with a love so pure and absolute it was breathtaking. In that moment, I felt my father's presence so strongly, as if he were standing right there beside me, his heart full of pride. I had kept my promise. I had gotten her here. I had kept her safe. The reception was held in a grand ballroom at a luxury hotel downtown. It was an opulent affair, a testament to the Vance family's wealth and status. Champagne flowed freely, a string quartet played in the corner, and hundreds of guests mingled, their voices a cheerful, celebratory hum. And at the center of it all was Arthur Vance holding court. He moved through the room like a king in his castle, shaking hands, clapping men on the back, his booming laughter echoing off the high ceilings, and he continued to treat me as if I were invisible. It wasn't subtle. It was a deliberate, pointed campaign of exclusion. When I tried to join a conversation he was leading, he would turn his body slightly, angling me out of the circle. When a guest tried to introduce us, he would say, "Oh yes, we've met. The sister," before immediately changing the subject. He looked past me, through me, around me. He made it clear in a dozen small but significant ways that I did not belong in his world. The hurt was real, a dull ache beneath the surface of my happiness for Ashley. But I refused to let him ruin this day. I focused on Ashley, on James, on the joy that filled the room. I danced with the groomsmen. I chatted with Ashley's friends. I made sure my sister's champagne glass was never empty. I was determined to be a fortress of positivity for her. I was sitting at my table during a lull in the festivities, watching Ashley and James on the dance floor, when a woman with a clipboard and a headset approached me. She was the wedding planner, a harried but efficient woman named Maria. "Elena," she asked, a hint of panic in her eyes. "I have a small favor to ask." "Of course, what is it?" The best man's speech was, "Well, it was a bit shorter than we'd anticipated," she said, grimacing slightly. "Just a quick toast, really. We have a little extra time in the schedule before the cake cutting, and I was wondering, would you be willing to say a few words? I know Ashley would absolutely love it." My stomach immediately tied itself in knots. I hadn't planned a speech. I wasn't a public speaker. The thought of standing up in front of this room full of strangers, a room full of people who looked at me like I was an intruder, was terrifying. My first instinct, my immediate visceral reaction, was to say no, to decline politely and retreat back into my comfortable invisibility. But then I looked over at the head table. Ashley was laughing, her face glowing. This was her day, and in that moment, I realized this wasn't about me. It wasn't about my fear, my insecurity, or my anger at Arthur Vance. This was about my sister. This was my one last chance, as her guardian, her protector, and her only family, to stand up and tell the world how incredible she was. It was my chance to give her a gift, the gift of our story, told in my own words. A sudden, steely resolve washed over me, silencing the panicked voice in my head. This wasn't about proving myself to them. It was about honoring us. I turned back to Maria and smiled. "I'd love to." Maria led me toward the stage, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet. The ballroom seemed vast, the distance to the microphone impossibly far. With every step, my heart pounded a little harder against my ribs. The string quartet finished their piece, and the MC, a cheerful man in a tuxedo, tapped the microphone, the sharp sound echoing through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please," he announced. "We have one more special toast tonight. Please join me in welcoming the bride's sister and maid of honor, Elena, to the stage." A polite ripple of applause spread through the room. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, curious, expectant. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the microphone. I scanned the crowd, my gaze sweeping past tables of elegantly dressed strangers, until I found her, Ashley. She was looking at me, her eyes wide with surprise and love. She gave me a small, encouraging smile. That was all I needed. I cleared my throat and began, my voice softer than I intended, but clear. "Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elena. I'm Ashley's sister." I paused, taking another breath to steady myself. When Ashley and I were little girls, our father, a carpenter, taught us that the strongest things are built from the heart. He wasn't talking about furniture. He was talking about family. I saw a flicker of confusion on some faces. This wasn't the standard light-hearted maid of honor speech. I didn't care. This was our story. After our father died, it was just the two of us. I was barely out of school, but overnight, I became her guardian, her provider, her only family. Our world had shattered, and we had to build a new one from the scratch. My voice wavered for a second, but I pushed through, my gaze fixed on my sister. While my friends were away at college, chasing their dreams, I was chasing rent. I worked 3 jobs, waitressing in the morning, office temping in the afternoon, and delivering pizzas at night, just to keep us standing. There were nights I was so tired I thought I couldn't go on. But then I would look at Ashley, and I knew I had to. My dream became her future. The room had gone completely silent. The clinking of glasses had stopped. Every eye was on me. No one was eating. No one was whispering. I could feel the weight of their attention, but it no longer felt scary. It felt right. I didn't have a college degree or a family fortune to fall back on. All I had was a promise I had made to my father, that I would always take care of his little girl. So when I thought we were going to lose everything all over again, I decided to take a risk. I started building something of my own. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then I allowed a small, soft smile to touch my lips. With 2 friends, out of a dusty garage, fueled by cheap coffee and desperation, we started a small tech company. We poured our blood, sweat, and every last penny into it. Everyone said we would fail. I took a deliberate look around the room, letting my eyes linger for a second on the faces of some of the city's most prominent business leaders. Then, I looked directly at the head table, right at Arthur Vance. That little startup, born out of a need to survive, is called Nexus. Today, Nexus software helps run the logistics and supply chain management for companies across the country, including, I believe, a few of you in this very room. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw people turning to whisper to their table mates. I saw the flash of recognition in the eyes of a few CEOs I had met with before, their minds connecting the dots between the powerful company and the quiet sister in the simple dress. But I wasn't finished. I turned my full attention back to Ashley, my voice softening again. So when I say that I am proud of my sister, it's not just because she found a wonderful man who loves her as much as I do. It's because I know firsthand what it took for us to get here. She faced the unimaginable, and she grew into the most incredible, resilient, and loving woman I have ever known. James, you are the luckiest man in the world, because Ashley isn't just a bride. She is my miracle. I raised my glass. To Ashley and James. For a split second, there was stunned silence. And then the room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a wave of genuine, heartfelt ovation. People were on their feet. I saw Ashley's face, streaked with tears, her hands covering her mouth as she cried and smiled at the same time. James was holding her, his own eyes shining with emotion as he applauded. And then I looked at Arthur Vance. He was frozen, his wine glass halfway to his lips. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly gray. His jaw was slack, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, horrified realization. He looked at me, then at the other powerful people in the room who were now looking at him, and in that moment, he didn't look like a king in his castle. He just looked like a small, foolish man who had made a very, very big mistake. As I stepped down from the stage, my legs trembling with adrenaline, I was immediately swarmed. People who had looked right through me an hour earlier were now eagerly shaking my hand, their faces alight with newfound respect and curiosity. Elena, that was an incredible story. I had no idea. Nexus, of course. My company uses your software. It's brilliant. We have to talk. I'd love to set up a meeting. I was no longer invisible. My story, the very thing I thought made me an outsider in this world of inherited privilege, had suddenly become my greatest asset. It was a dizzying, surreal transformation. I politely accepted their business cards, smiled, and made my way through the crowd, my only goal to get to my sister. Before I could reach her, a figure blocked my path. It was Arthur Vance. His wife, Eleanor, hovered nervously behind him. The arrogant, dismissive posture was gone, replaced by an urgent, almost desperate energy. His face was flushed, his smile painfully artificial. Elena, that was quite a speech. Truly inspiring, he boomed, his voice dripping with a false sincerity that was almost comical. Nexus, my goodness, I feel like a fool. My team at Vance Capital has been trying to get a meeting with your people for months. We've been trying to put together an acquisition offer. Your platform is revolutionary. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are an incredibly impressive young woman, a true titan of industry in the making. The fawning praise was so thick, I felt like I needed to wipe it off my skin. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a new kind of assessment, not of my social standing, but of my market value. Then he asked the question that revealed he had learned absolutely nothing. Why didn't you tell me who you really were? He asked, a genuine bewilderment in his voice. I looked him straight in the eye, my own expression calm, my voice even. There was no anger left, just a quiet, profound certainty. I did tell you who I was, I said softly. I told you I was Ashley's sister. I held his gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of my words settle. Because respect shouldn't depend on what someone does for a living, Arthur. It should exist before you ever know their title. His smile faltered. His face went blank with a confusion he couldn't hide. He had been so thoroughly disarmed, not by a shout or an insult, but by a simple, undeniable truth. He had no response. I didn't wait for one. I gave him a small, final nod, and then I walked away, leaving him speechless in the middle of the crowded ballroom. I spent the rest of the night celebrating with my sister, truly celebrating. We danced until our feet hurt, we ate too much cake, and we laughed until we cried. As I watched her drive away with James, off to start her new life, I felt a sense of peace and closure that I had been chasing for a decade. Months have passed since the wedding. Life has found a new, happy normal. My company, Nexus, continues to thrive. Last week, a contract renewal came across my desk. It was from Vance Capital. Arthur's company still licenses our software. It's one of our most lucrative accounts. I signed it without a moment's hesitation. Strictly business. No favors, no friendship. He pays full price, just like everyone else. I don't need his approval. I don't need his respect. I spent so many years fighting for survival, believing that my worth was tied to how much I could provide, how much I could endure. But on that wedding day, standing in front of that crowd, I realized the truth. My worth was never in the company I built. It was in the sister I raised. It was in the promise I kept. True respect isn't something other people give you. It's something you build inside yourself, with the love and sacrifice that no one else ever sees. I don't need their applause. I have my sister's happiness. And the knowledge that true strength can't be bought, inherited, or displayed. It's earned. If you've ever been dismissed or overlooked, only to rise higher than they ever could have imagined, hit like, subscribe, and share your own story in the comments. Because real power isn't in proving them wrong, it's in knowing your worth long before they ever do.